Well, it is finally official. The New York Jets are hiring Aaron Glenn and Lance Newmark. Aaron Glenn for the next head coach of the New York Jets and Lance Newmark for the next general manager of the Jets. So there was some slight concern after they left the building yesterday. There were reports that the Jets might try to make the deal official on Tuesday when both Glenn and Newmark were in the building. It would later be reported that Aaron Glenn flew back home to Detroit on Woody Johnson's private jet. So I would think that's a pretty good sign, or I would have thought at the time that it was a pretty good sign that something was going to get done. And of course, naturally, it did. It was a matter of when, not if. So let's talk about it. I mean, by now I feel like you probably know how I feel about both of these candidates, but for Aaron Glenn, he spent the last 4 years as the defensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions. This past year was by far his most successful season on that defense, or with that defense, as they finished 7th in points allowed, despite the number of injuries that they sustained throughout the season. Some of their best players, Aiden Hutchinson, missed a ton of time. Alex Anzalone missed a ton of time. They were down, I think, like 13 regulars at one point, which is obviously very, very tough. They were tied for the most amount of different guys who started for the defense in the league this year. So Aaron Glenn was going through it defensively. Now, one of the things that people who are not big Aaron Glenn fans will point out is his defense was never elite in Detroit. He's not an elite defensive mastermind. And that's not the reason why I think you hire Aaron Glenn. I think you hire Aaron Glenn because of his leadership abilities.
There's a saying I always say, I didn't stick my toe in the water to see if it was cold. I jumped right on in there. Right, and I scouted, in-house scout with the Jets a couple of years, then I went on the road. I was driving for hours, right, college scouting. Then I went right to being an assistant DB coach. I did my QC thing, because I want to make sure I didn't miss one step. I want to start from the bottom. I told everybody I was there, don't treat me any different than anybody else, right? Because I want to understand everything there is about the scouting process. I want to know everything about being a QC. I want to know everything about being an assistant coach, all right, to a lead DB coach, to a defense coordinator I am right now, right? And I'm hoping to be a head coach at some point.
Glenn's also an interesting hire because he has scouting experience. He was someone who came into the league or got back into the league after playing, and his route was very interesting, as it obviously comes with a scouting experience to begin. Then he was an assistant coach. Then he was a positional coach. Then he was a coordinator, and now he will be a head coach. So he worked his way back up the rungs of the ladder. He played in the New York market, so my hope is that he understands what the New York market is really like, maybe a little bit more than a guy like Robert Saleh. Yes, Saleh's defenses performed better in San Francisco than Aaron Glenn's in Detroit. No one will deny that. But I think part of the downfall of Robert Saleh was he had no idea what the New York market was going to be like, and wasn't great when you put a camera and a microphone in front of his face. And then on top of that, he focused too much on the defense, where Aaron Glenn has at least said the right things right now, and you hope that they ring true, that he will spend equal amounts of times with the offense and defense.
As far as, typically, I mean, Bill Belichick is a shining example of a defensive coach who won Super Bowls, but typically it's offensive coordinators. They come from the offense who become Super Bowl head-winning coaches.
Yeah.
Why do you think that might be? Is there?
Well, I don't know if that's truly accurate. I can just go off the top of my head with Bill Carr, Mike Tomlin, Bill Belichick. That's won a ton of Super Bowls as a defensive coach. And here's the one thing that I would say about myself. I'm a coach. I just happen to be on defense. I understand the offense just as well as a number of people. So if you want to hire me, you're going to hire a coach. You're not going to hire a defensive coach. I'm going to talk to the offense just as much as I'm going to talk to the defense.
As for Lance Newmark, he will be the general manager. Now, he spent an absolute ton of time in Detroit from 1998 to 2023. Long time. Not a lot of winning for most of that. As I will say here, they had the most success at the end of his tenure there, where he was a senior director of player personnel in 2022 and 23. He spent this past year as an assistant GM in Washington. So I guess you could say he was a part of 2 turnarounds in Washington and Detroit. But Detroit, he was there for so long that it's a little bit of a red flag. But at least a positive for me is there's a couple things. One, he had a major influence on the Lions 2016 draft class. That was one of the times where he got promoted. And they found 2 long-term starters on the offensive line, including a 3rd-round pick, which turned into, which was Graham Glasgow. And clearly he was a stud and has been a very good offensive lineman in this league for a long time. The Jets with Joe Douglas, unfortunately, in the mid rounds or pretty much anything that wasn't a top 40 pick, he struggled to find talent on the offensive side of the ball. Yes, you could find examples of the defense having success on mid round or late round guys. Examples, Michael Carter II is a good one. Brandon Eccles to an extent. UDFA finds along the way in Tony Adams and Bryce Huff, and there's other examples as well. Jamie Sherwood's a good one, but on the offensive side of the ball, that was one of the biggest things that went against Joe Douglas during his tenure here. I also like from Newmark that he isn't afraid to use analytics or new age practices despite being a longtime scout. So he's not stuck in his ways. He seems like he's going to do the eye test first and then kind of get into analytics, which is my preference. But I think you need to be able to blend the 2 together and not be like, oh, the nerds are ruining football, or just lean all the way into the analytics and not put as much stock into watching film, because clearly I think there's a place for both in the NFL, and I think both are important to decision makings. But I won't lie to you, I'm more excited about Glenn than I am Newmark. We'll see. Obviously, I hope that it works out. I'll be rooting for both of these guys to turn this franchise around, and I think at least, especially with Aaron Glenn, he has earned the opportunity to be a head coach. He's not unqualified. He's worked his way up. He's a former player, started from the bottom, then became a coordinator, and now a head coach. I think he deserves the opportunity before we completely write him off. He might not end up being a good head coach. It's possible. We've seen it before. We've seen guys that we've been excited about get hired and then not work out. But the reality is we have no idea what pretty much any of these coaches would have been that the Jets interview. So I think he deserves a fair shake. I don't think it's an extension of Robert Saleh. I think he's more intense than Robert Saleh. And I hope that he's more of a CEO than what Robert Saleh was, who was basically a defensive coordinator who was just answering questions every day. That's going to do it for me in this one, guys. I'm Matt O'Leary. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll catch you next time.